Happy Monday and welcome back to the final week of the Rocketeer Minute, where each and every day, Monday through Friday, we've been going over the greatest adventure movie Walt Disney's ever made, the 1991 Joe Johnston feature, The Rocketeer. I'm one of your hosts, Jim O'Kane of TVDads.com.
And I'm Hal Bryan, an airplane nerd from the Experimental Aircraft Association here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And Jim, we're diving into minute 106, our last Monday. In fact, this isn't even a full week, 4 episodes and counting. And we have had so many great guests on the show, and we've been so lucky to have some of the people involved in the film. And what an absolute thrill it is to say, not only did we somehow con screenwriter Danny Bilson into coming back.
Convinced.
Con is short for convinced.
Sure. Okay.
But he's brought Paul DeMeo with him, and the two of them together have shared screenwriting credit on The Rocketeer and an amazing number of other things over the last couple of decades. So, Paul, Danny, welcome. Danny, welcome back. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks. I'm glad to drag Paul here.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. Glad to be a guest. You guys have done a pretty crazy thing here.
You're not the first to point that out.
Which I greatly appreciate, by the way.
It's good going over old times, especially from a quarter century ago. That it's amazing how much people remember about this era. But I guess these were exciting times in a lot of people's lives.
Well, the one thing I noticed is listening. I've probably listened to 6 or 8 episodes, and the one thing I noticed, which is great, is people will remember things or talk about aspects of the film that I either wasn't present for or had no idea or don't remember in the least. So it's really nice for me, too, because it gives me a fuller picture and a kind of permanent record of the movie, which is pretty unique, which is very cool, guys.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thanks very much. It's we've talked so much on this show about how frustrating it is that we don't have a nice Blu-ray release with lots of extras or making of or any kind of commentary and things like that. And I don't think we had such grand designs when we set out, but when we look back on 100+ episodes, I feel like we've got one of the better repositories of the in-depth looks at the film.
I think you do.
Oh yeah, I mean, you have the best. You have the best repository. There's nothing even close.
Well, we haven't talked to Mike Bruno recently, but he has the ultimate repository.
He's got the repository of everything you see in the movie. But it's amazing to me, and I always we go through this every time, and let's not gush, Hal, but I always end up doing a little bit of it. And Danny, you heard all this before, but happy to say it again. It's amazing to me to sit here and think that. We're 4 guys having a conversation, but you 2 guys in particular, working so closely with Dave Stevens, you thought this up. This came out of your heads based on his work, and we have this love of the movie in common. Except from Jim and me, we're on the consumer side of it. So to be able to chat with you guys on the creative side of it, to say thank you once again for that work you did, a couple of decades ago, it's such a privilege.
Yeah, but what we do have in common is we were on the consumer side of the first series of books. We got to contribute to the second series, but Paul and I walked into that comic book store back in 85 or something. Maybe 84 even. It was somewhere around there. I had the Golden Apple on Melrose, and in the bins we found the Comico Rocketeer episodes, and we fell in love just like you guys did with Dave's work, and I'll always credit Dave for the Rocketeer.
Well, I remember looking at the cover of one of the comics and turning to Danny and saying, "This guy's a movie," just the image of the character, and it was period and all that stuff that we love. That I know Danny's talked about how so much of our influences fall back to old movies and the old serials and just our deep appreciation for those films of that era. And seeing just the art that Dave did and how committed he was to recreating the period and dialogue and all that, it really drew us in right from the start.
Yeah, and getting to put Rondo Hatton back up on the big
Well,
screen, that was a gift. That was
Right. And Errol Flynn, in a manner
Sure.
of speaking.
Those were all right.
Yeah, that, the whole, I know Danny talked about the whole Rondo thing. That's to me, still one of the most unbelievable things we pulled off in the movie is that, having that character, for as many people who actually knew what we were doing at the time the movie came out, I assume a certain amount of the audience recognized the character, but certainly younger kids didn't know what we were doing. They just thought, oh, big, creepy, scary, tall guy. But that was that was a great bit, is getting him in there. And then, of course, Dave and I and Danny incorporated Lothar into the second Rocketeer series comic as well.
Yeah, which was fantastic graphic work. In Dave's hands, just being some of those pages are just amazing.
It's the work in the art is what made him so slow. It's, in a way, it's one of the reasons why The Rocketeer is a comic book based movie, I think is special in that when the movie was released, there were only those 6 initial issues that were published. And it was not a mainstream character. Certainly aficionados knew the book and were aware of Dave, but it wasn't anything like, Superman or Batman or any of the more famous characters. And there also wasn't a huge body of work that already existed for the character. So you didn't get into all this stuff about, oh, God, what story are we going to tell? There have been 50 years of comics about the Rocketeer. So we started pretty much with, okay, let's begin with whatever parts of the original story work and build out from there. And there's sections in the movie, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with from your familiarity with the comics themselves, that are literally transcribed from the comic. Like the opening chase with the gangsters and the first big rescue of Malcolm when the plane is going down. Those are right out of the pages of the book. All the stuff at the airfield, quite a lot of that. So
even Millie with the frying pan.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there that was right in the comic, and we knew that we had to preserve that. And the Howard Hughes character, which in the book was Dave's kind of disguised Doc Savage, which we had to change, but so many elements stayed the same, and it allowed us then to add the bigger things to make it more into a full-scale movie. But absolutely, it's, in my mind, there are whole stretches of that movie that are just literal transcriptions of what Dave did, and that to me is really pleasing, and I know he liked that as well.
Was it difficult extracting the Betty Page character and her photographer friend out of the whole script when you were rewriting for Jenny? How did that go?
Well, my memory of that is I don't think we ever had the cheesecake plot with the photographer. Danny, did we even have him in the earliest versions of the story? I don't think we did.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I know we called her Betty until Disney made us change the name. And we did have, I may have mentioned it in the last one if it got through the censors, we did have some more edgy sexual references in earlier treatments or drafts that was us taking a shot at a few things, but that didn't happen. I did talk about the Lothar and the panties, didn't I, last time? And I didn't.
Lothar and the panties. Okay, now we're
If
talking about one I don't remember.
Yes, okay. Yeah. Right. If you did, I blotted it out because it was traumatic. So we might as well dive in since you've opened the door.
Yeah. No, I remember it was either a treatment. I think we wrote the scene where he's searching the house and he's in where he's into the Cliff and Petey's place, or did he go? Somehow he got into Betty's room and he got a drawer open and he got a pair of her panties out. And he didn't. I didn't want to go further on the air.
This could have taken a really dark plunge. Yeah,
I will say,
No more.
he
Okay.
did
Yeah.
not put them on. He did not do that. It was something actually less savory. But let's just move on. And but though I'm sure that those ideas were influenced by the original stuff where she was, more towards
Right.
Betty Page.
I don't
meets Cliff
recall that
Secord.
in our draft or even in the early stories that her primary job was ever like cheesecake model. I think pinup model. I think it was
No,
always
it wasn't.
actress / extra. And maybe at some point we flirted with, maybe she does a little, posing on the side, but that went away pretty fast, as I recall.
Oh.
Yeah.
Danny had mentioned that you were that both of you were kind of I would say shocked. I think that's the most positive attitude at Alan Arkin's performance of Peavy. The way he read it, you were expecting more of like a Joe Pesci, Danny DeVito type of snappy, peppy delivery, and he was more laconic.
Yeah. Well, we modeled our interpretation of the character on Dave's interpretation, and to me, the relationship between Peavy and Cliff was always in those old movies, those old aviator movies. If Cliff were Jimmy Stewart, then Peavy would have been one of those great fast-talking character actors like William Demarest. He would have been.
Yeah.
It needed. We always thought of it as having that fast, snappy Howard Hawks type rhythm. And I remember being on the set a couple of times, and I didn't talk to Arkin a lot, but I did speak to him a couple of times, and they'd already been shooting for 2 or 3 weeks. And he said something to me about, it took me a while to kind of figure this character out and to get him. But he felt more comfortable at that time. And in a way, of course, the movie was shot out of sequence, but there are scenes where I can feel that he's getting more into the rhythm of it and more into the snap of it. I thought it was all on the page, and he's a brilliant actor, so I think somehow he was searching to find that character, and if somebody had just said to him, hey, 1930s movie, you're the best friend, you're the wisecracking, cynical, snappy best friend, a guy like Arkin, he would have got that in a second.
Yeah, not that coming across as avuncular worked for him too. I think that coming across as a mentor didn't hurt the film, but yeah, it was a different take than what the writers had.
But there was always, in even Dave's story, there was always a, father-son type of relationship between the two. Cliff was the errant boy, and Peavy was the guy trying to talk some sense into his thick skull.
Yeah.
So how much were you around the actual production of it? And talking to Danny last time, it sounded like you guys had kind of moved on by the time the bulk of the production was up and running.
I think listening to Danny's episodes, was frustrating for us and frustrating for Joe as well, because he would have preferred to have us on the set a lot more. Is we were right in the middle of production on the Flash series then, and so anytime we had an opportunity to go to the set, we would take it. And certainly when they were shooting on the Disney sets, on the stages, on the lot, because we were Warner Brothers, that's 5 minutes away. So when we had time, we would run over there. I remember going to see the Zeppelin exterior set, which was, where was that, Danny? Vasquez Rocks out there somewhere near Magic Mountain, I think.
No, is that where it was? I vaguely remember that.
It was out there somewhere where they built the tail section. Were you out there that night? Because I remember going out there when they were shooting.
To me.
I remember going out there when they were shooting the tail section stuff with the, with the stunt doubles running up and down the tail and.
I remember 2 hours in traffic going to Long Beach to where the hangar was, where Howard Hughes' office was. I do remember that.
Yeah.
And of course, I remember going out to near Valencia, where the Bulldog Cafe was at one time. Because that's the time we were driving back, and Dalton was in the car next to us, and we were pretending we were in a James Bond villain chase. I do remember that.
Yeah, that was the first time we met Tim, was when we went out there to talk to him about the part. And, he's, I remember that Danny was talking about or you guys were talking about when Dalton went into the German accent and the Zeppelin gondola. And
Right.
the first time Danny and I saw the dailies for that, and I think this was, I don't know who else had the same reaction, we looked at each other and was like, what is he doing? Because that wasn't in the script. But I have to tell you, in all honesty, when I've seen the film in, recent years, and certainly when I saw it when they did the screening for the 20th anniversary, I've come more and more to appreciate the different layers to his performance. And I think what he was trying to do at the end was to simply show he was kind of cracking up a little bit. And this is just my interpretation, is that he was cracking up a little bit. All facade falls away. And this is who I really am. The German who's, faking the accent. And I'm dropping it. But there was another thing that Tim wanted to do. And I remember talking to him, and Danny, I think, was there. And of course, and I think even Joe Johnston was there. And he had this idea in his head that Sinclair should be falling in love with Jenny during the course of the story. And I think it ended up, and we didn't agree with that. We thought, look, this is just a mission. I mean, maybe you're a guy that thinks she's attractive, you're going to work her, but we don't really see the character literally falling in love with her. That's part of his psychosis or whatever. But I think it all just played as subtext. There's nothing really overt in the movie where that's happening.
Well, you can see it in the club when he's having dinner with her and he's all Google-eyed over her.
Yeah, but you could also just
I remember that.
Yeah.
Well, and when he's holding up the negligee and stuff like that, and he's talking about how desperately he wants to see her in and all this other stuff, it didn't seem like acting. It seemed more like he was getting into it a little bit too much.
Or he was just getting into it because he was like Errol Flynn and he liked sleeping with a lot of women.
Yeah, there's always that, yeah.
I always just...
Perhaps not unique to Errol Flynn, but sure.
Certainly part of that. Certainly part of that actor's reputation. And in his house there was all in the actual Errol Flynn's house. And I remember, Danny, we talked about putting this in the script. Is that in the actual house that I think the ruins of it are still up in the Hollywood Hills, and he called it like the Eagle's Nest or something like that. Do you remember, Danny, the story that there was like a mirrored panel in the ceiling of the bedroom with a camera in it? Do you remember that story?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Because we had talked about doing something like that in Sinclair's house, but that was one of the rumors of the house, the actual Errol Flynn. So we would try and incorporate those little bits here and there. A lot of it was just for us. Nobody else noticed,
Were you ever tempted to make it Errol Flynn rather than a character that you
we
can kill
never
off?
thought no, because we were playing off that legend that he was a Nazi spy.
Yeah.
I don't know that we ever believed it or wanted to sully his memory in any way like that. It was we were just playing off the rumor to give us some juice there.
Yeah, and I don't think we would have been able to get away with it legally.
How was Disney when you were dropping in characters like W.C. Fields and Clark Gable, and obviously they would have to track down their the owners of their IP and stuff. Were they okay or?
Yeah, Danny, I don't remember any resistance.
I don't remember any pushback on that. No, not at all.
And I think that I don't know that we had Clark Gable specific. We did write the field scene, but I don't remember if we specifically had Clark Gable or they just happened to, hey, we need some, look-alike movie stars, and they threw him in.
No, Joe could have done that.
Yeah, Joe, I think that might have been Joe's
could have done that. But I think we wrote that stuff.
We could have.
Here's the thing. It was 1990. And executives and people of our generation knew who these people were. So, we all had a lot more relationship to their films than people today, or those two writers who were writing Rocketeers certainly have.
Right. So, when my kids were little and would watch this movie and saw Fields come up to the table, they didn't know who he was. They just thought, who's that funny fat guy? So... It didn't register with them, but if it does register, it's pretty cool, And as the years go by, of course, there's more distance on that. And there was another actress we were going to do in the famous never produced a little sequence at the Chinese theater, the one that was cut.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I'm trying to remember, it was either like Ginger Rogers or Betty Davis or something. We were going to have another ringer there who was about to put footsteps in the cement. And that, as I remember, got cut really late in the schedule because they were going to do it, and it was a late cut.
There's a strong reference or a discussion of it in the Souvenir magazine that steps you through the story of the film. And obviously, by the time that it went to press, it was still in the script. For those who may not know, Cliff was on his way to the South Seas Club, and if I remember correctly, someone is falling, and he rescues this person and then lands on the wet cement at the Grumman's Chinese, and Cliff, or the Rocketeer, gets his footprints at the Chinese theater, and then he flies off.
Exactly right. And if you read the, somebody wrote a, the novelization of the movie script, right? There's a paperback that came out at the same time. That scene's in the book because it was too late to take it out of the manuscript of the book.
Is it difficult reading a novelization? I mean, when you're looking and saying that's not how we wrote it, or it's another take?
I looked at it. He followed the script pretty closely. And actually, we kind of I remember briefly angling for, hey, why don't you just let us write it? Because it wouldn't take us that long. But, they probably thought it would take us away from doing other things or whatever. But, I didn't read it from cover to cover, but I looked at it and read through it, and it seemed, like the script was pretty descriptive. So, I don't remember seeing stuff where he had to invent whole scenes or sequences or things like that to fill in stuff. So,
yeah. Now, did he come up with Ambrose, or did you have Ambrose in the script?
Ambrose Peabody?
Yes.
I'm trying to remember I think that was in the script, and I don't know if it was ever in the comics, but I remember it came up to a point where we needed a first name for Peavy, and I think we just asked Dave, what's the first name of Peavy?
Just a mystery. I was looking through the comic books, and I couldn't find any mention of it in the comic books. So I was just thinking, it's got to come from somewhere. So
yeah, I think we had to ask him. I think we had to ask Dave, what's his first name? And there's some other things in there that that were little homages that were removed besides the Betty Page thing, like Eddie Valentine, the gangster. His original name in our drafts was Eddie Mars. And if you remember, Eddie Mars from The Big Sleep, right? So we thought, that'll be fun. We'll put, for whoever gets it, we'll put it in the script. And it went pretty far before somebody at Disney Legal caught it and said we had to change it. And and we thought we'd slip that one in. But we did manage to get in the guy driving the car at the beginning, Chase.
Wilmer,
yeah, from...
Oh, yeah, the Gunsel.
The Gunsel, you got it. Exactly right.
Right.
So that was one of our other little, homages. If you get it, great. If you don't,
Wow.
Yeah, a bunch of... And Danny, do you remember why Lothar had twin 45s?
I don't know. Was it a Shadow homage? I don't know.
The Shadow.
What was it? Yeah.
That was from the Shadow.
Yeah.
Twin 45s.
Well, and a Shadow, it was really tied to the Rocketeer through Mike Kaluta, who was doing those Shadow books at the same time. And I remember Mike Kaluta also inks the Rocketeer, the Cliff's New York Adventure stuff. He was inking that as a favor to Dave. They were very, very close friends.
There were no spirit references. I was thinking there might have been some of those. Since
no.
They had both. They were in doubleheader comics together.
Yeah, but not for us.
There is another. I was talking to Danny about this yesterday. There is another homage in the film, the very last scene in the film, where the kids are running around playing, Rocketeer to the rescue.
Right.
Patsy and her friends are playing, and they're running around the plane outside the Bulldog. We based that scene on a piece of Mike Kaluta tribute art that appeared in one of Dave's comics. And it's in one of the, I'm not sure which issue it is, but it's like Cliff is reading a newspaper or something, leaning against a wall, and you can see a Rocketeer poster behind him, and the kids are running around in front of him with the oatmeal box on their back and a tin pan on their head, and we put that in the movie. That's really a nod to Mike.
Huh. The original, there was I think it was in one of the scripts. We had talked about this the other day. There, when as they're running around, we'd see Patsy kind of overshadowed by a pork pie hat with Lothar, but it was actually another kid. Was that in an original draft? I'm trying to remember where I'd seen that.
That's
earlier.
Not familiar. I'm not.
It was. It turns out that it's a kid wearing a pork pie hat.
Okay.
And I don't know if that came from now I don't remember if it was in the novelization, but it was from somewhere. Somebody had a version of that where it looked like Lothar's come back, and only it's just the kid, and then she chases after Lothar, or the kid is Lothar.
Yeah, I can't remember without looking at it who's chasing who in the scenes, whether the other kids are dressed as gangsters or whatever. I don't remember in that scene. So that was there's another bit. I'll test Danny's memory. I don't remember exactly what the numbers are, but when the FBI agents go to Bigelow's office and find him dead, and they pick up a piece of paper that he left behind where, it looks like he left an address. And this is what has led Lothar to Cliff and Peavy's house, all right? And the numbers are something like 1637. 1635. Danny, do you remember why we use those numbers?
Yeah, I think I told
Did
this
you?
story in the last when I was doing a podcast. Yeah, it was our extension
Right.
of Warner Brothers. Yeah. Yeah, I gave him a couple of our little Easter eggs in there, including Mrs. Pie last time.
Of course. and to this day, Joe Johnston laughs about that one. Says, I still can't believe we got away with it.
Wow. Are Fitch and Wooly from anywhere, or is that from Dave's original?
I think he had some FBI guys in the comic, but I don't think they had specific names. That was just us doing, two old movie style G-men, two contrasting guys, and the two actors who played them were really good. I remember having a conversation with Ed Lauder once where he was telling me, he cornered me and he said, I love the script. I love using all the old slang and the dialogue and the lingo. It's just a lot of fun for me. And we just based them on, old G-men that would be in a 1930s movie.
You let him waltz. That's
Yeah. And I think Danny told the story how we'd get these notes from these kind of endless notes from Disney during the many years of writing the script. And sometimes it would be more slang, less slang, then 3 months later, put more period slang in it. We love it. So we tried not to make it too cartoony, so that it would sound, because you reach a point where if you put too much in, it sounds like a parody. So we wanted it to be fun and feel natural enough without going overboard. And I think it was balanced by characters that were more realistic in the way they acted and reacted, like Terry O'Quinn playing the Howard Hughes character. Because, Bigelow, of course, our great friend John Polito, who unfortunately passed away last year, he was perfect. I mean, Polito was exactly the guy in the comic book. And we used John several times in some of our other projects, and he was the greatest. I mean, what a character actor. He always, to me, is like a guy from the 1930s. He could have been in one of those movies. And he just chewed that part up, and it was so great to see his dailies. Always made me laugh.
It was amazing. I was trying to figure out, we were talking with Danny last time about the sequel to this would have probably been the New York Adventure, or some version of Cliff's New York Adventure.
Yeah, the sequel, right. What I remember with Dave and Danny and I talking about it was, yes, we want to take him to New York, because Dave's idea was, we got to see the Rocketeer flying through the great famous architecture of New York. I want to see the Rocketeer flying on the Empire State Building and, over the Brooklyn Bridge and all that stuff. What the plot was going to be, I really don't remember. It would have probably had some tie-in to what had happened in the previous film. I don't think we would have been stressing pre-war stuff. I'm not sure. I think it might have been just a gangster type story. I really don't remember. But because whatever elements ended up going into the Cliff's New York Adventure comic, I don't think it would have been similar to what we would have done in a movie. Well, first of all, Lothar was still around, so the continuity would have been messed up. But I don't think we would have done, the flashback story to Cliff as a young man in the circus. I love that story, by the way. I think there's some great ideas in there. But I don't think that would have been the movie.
You wouldn't have gone to Atlantic City or any of that.
Well, maybe we would have done that. That would have been cool.
Yeah, you would have beat Boardwalk Empire by a decade at least.
Yeah. But I don't remember there being anything, when we made our deal or talked about making the sequels where we had written up 3 or 4 paragraphs summarizing what that second film would be.
No, we never got that far. That's my recollection. Is we
and
never
the third
got
one,
that
who
far.
the hell knows? But the third one, I think, like Danny might have mentioned, I'm sure the third one we would have taken him into the thick of the war.
Yeah, it would have been Captain America, basically. I mean, it would have been that.
Yeah,
kind of
it would have been Captain America, which was, when I saw Captain America, the first one that Joe directed, it was right before. I think they had just finished it because he showed a sequence from it or a trailer from it when we had the Rocketeer 20th anniversary screening. So it was right before the release of the film. And when I saw the movie, I said, it kind of to me feels like a sort of spiritual brother, let's say, to the Rocketeer, just in the tone.
Yeah.
And maybe wish that he had done another one.
Yeah, I think it probably would have looked like all the war propaganda posters at the end of Captain America. I'm picturing that's how the whole movie would have been.
Yeah,
that would have been the perfect sensibility for it. So, Paul and Danny, I don't want this to come across as a cruel question. Okay, well then.
Hey, cruelty is our state of mind. We got
I was gonna
we
say.
can deal with it.
But if we've touched on the possibility of a sequel, and there's been some announcement of the Rocketeers and things out there now. But if you guys were going to write a sequel now, and set it, say, call it 30 years after the original, do you have any idea what that story might look like?
I have my idea. What do you think, Danny?
Well, I would say something a little bit different is that, and maybe I mentioned this last time, is Paul and I wrote a graphic novel called Red Menace that took place in the 50s in L.A.
Huge fan. Huge fan over here.
That for us was the spiritual sequel to The Rocketeer. Because if you remember, by the end, the kid can fly. And it was Los Angeles. It was, 15 years later, 12, 13 years later. And tonally, we were doing the same things. It was very, it mined the period. Even the Birdman of Alcatraz was a character in it, if you recall.
Oh, right.
And for us, I always felt that was the spiritual sequel to The Rocketeer. If we were going to do a sequel, if they had come to us a few years ago, which of course never happens, if they had come to us and said, we want to do another one, the first thing we would have said, well, how old is Bill, right? And because it's 25 years since then, can we use Bill? Do we have to hand it off to a younger Rocketeer, or do we play a last hurrah story? Because we kind of like those. As a matter of fact, I probably mentioned to you guys that our most recent feature script is about Vietnam veterans in their 60s who go back into Cambodia.
Yeah,
right.
That's sort of a treasure Sierra Madre thing. So we like last hurrah stories, but a lot of it, like those writers told you, Disney would have had some ideas about where they would want to go or not want to go. We probably would have had to pitch 3 to 5 different versions. But one thing about us is we always like verisimilitude, so we would have tried to say, well, can we get Bill? Can we get Jennifer? Can we, how many of the people how close can we make it to that 25 years later? And then, Paul and I did talk about this. Actually, now my brain is sort of rolling around to it. And I'm sure we would have done
Yeah, you could have done Bay of Pigs. You could have done, Cuban Missile Crisis thing.
It would have been late 50s because by the 60s, it started to not feel, the language changed a lot, and it started to, certainly we wouldn't have anything post-1963, post the Cultural Revolution, so of the 60s. We would have wanted to stay
Eisenhower
in
land or...
sort of the G whiz feeling of the period. The other thing is Dave Stevens' next project that he wanted to do was he wanted to do a thing in the 50s about hot rods and strippers and crime in 50s LA.
Oh, wow.
And I definitely remember him talking to us about that, sort of more getting into, because, the Betty Page era really was like the 50s. And Dave was fascinated with that. And I remember seeing Ed Wood and thinking, well, that was kind of the closest thing that anybody ever got to what Dave wanted to do. I remember thinking that when I saw it. Because remember, Dave had a relationship to that sort of, his first wife was even a, kind of a B-movie actress, as I recall.
Yeah. No, I think the 50s would have been a great era, the mid-50s, and or even, towards the end, but I would have kept it in the 50s. I think, I agree with Danny. It would have been great to keep Bill and Jennifer present in the movie. And maybe the story is about, it's either a Last Hurrah story, or maybe he, at some point in the film, they've got a kid, or he's got a nephew, or there's a neighbor kid, whatever, and you see it getting handed off, or maybe something like that might have been fun. But the way they moved the Indiana Jones character around, I mean, the last film was not my favorite in the series, but certainly showed that you could move the character into different decades and keep him vital and keep him the same character.
Well, I mean, we got Luke Skywalker. There's
right. You got Luke Skywalker,
a silent Billy Campbell handing off a jetpack.
Handing off the rocket pack.
Yeah, I certainly, even if it had turned out to be, let's make this a story about, Cliff's estranged son finds the rocket pack in the garage and goes off and uses it in some kind of adventure, whatever, and you make it a father and son story, even something like that.
Yeah.
There's any number of ways you could have gone, but I don't really know much about whatever this new movie is, other than I've heard that it's set during the Second World War and the Rocketeer has disappeared.
No,
it's totally different now.
It's 50s.
50s? Okay, so it's not even wartime anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, then I have no idea. I have no idea what they're
Remember,
doing.
it's about an African American female. That's what they said in the announcements a couple of years ago. I mean, I read the same stuff everybody else did. The biggest mystery to me was why those two athletes were executive producers.
Blake Griffin and
I'm a fan. And Ryan Khalil. I mean, I'm a fan, but I thought that was really bizarre.
See, I thought even when they were talking about the young female star that they were still saying something like 6 years after the first film, which would put us late World War II.
I don't know either.
I don't know, guys.
Let me quote the Hollywood Reporter. The new take keeps the story in a period setting and offers a fresh view of the characters set 6 years after the original Rocketeer and after Secord has vanished while fighting the Nazis. An unlikely new hero emerges, a young African-American female pilot who takes up the mantle of the Rocketeer in an attempt to stop an ambitious and corrupt rocket scientist from stealing jetpack technology in what could prove to be a turning point in the Cold War.
Well, okay.
So the Cold War hadn't really started in 1944, so I wonder...
I think
some holes there.
Going back to your point, it is kind of a crappy question.
Yes.
I think cruel. I think cruel was
I feel
the
like
word.
an idiot.
Cruel, yeah.
I feel like an idiot sitting here musing about what they might be doing, right? It's just kind of like, it's just a little frustrating.
Contract, because when I first heard about this, I said, I'm pretty sure we don't have any rights because it wasn't our original, whatever. But I found our old contract, and we were locked in for something like 5 or 6 years after the first film. So obviously by now, they had no obligation to us. But I really do feel that even our participation aside, I feel like for the people who are really the fans of this movie, and I think that includes young kids who grew up watching this film, because so many times Danny and I have met people that, you know, the first time they saw the movie was when they were kids and watched it on video with their parents, you know? And to at least have some physical connection to the original film, whether it's including some of the stars like Bill or whoever, I would do that just for the fans, because I think there's a lot of love out there for this movie, you know, that just generated over time. And I can't try and second guess the Disney executives at this point, but I hope that they don't miscalculate this to the point where they lose what it is that people love about the original film. That's all.
Hear, hear.
Yeah,
And Danny, for the record, I knew it was going to be a cruel question, but it wasn't meant to be. Number one, no offense intended, of course. Number two, it was.
I know that.
It was. It's wishful thinking on my part. Like, even if there were no talk of any other sequel at all, it's just if you guys could wave your magic wand, you know, what story would you guys tell? And so that was the happy part of the question.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't get me wrong. It's just sitting here musing about what somebody else might be doing with the property. It's just unpleasant. I mean, I'm not, you know me. I mean, you know me by now. I'm not kidding around. It's like, you know, they're doing the Flash series without us. They're going to do a Rocketeer thing without us, and we are better writers now than we were then. I mean, that's absolutely true. So it's just a part of Hollywood that isn't so much fun for those of us of a certain age.
Well, I do take comfort and pride in salve my wounds of cruelty with the idea that, you know, we didn't create the Rocketeer, we didn't create the Flash, but we got to do our versions, and those will always be there. And even though the new Flash show, you know, we know Andrew Kreisberg, we've talked to him many times, and, you know, told us several times, you know, oh, I want to have you guys do an episode of the script. They've had an episode of the show. They've had people who were on our version of the show. They've had Mark guest star. Obviously, there's a huge influence stylistically from our show in that version. And even that, to me, is kind of weirdly satisfying, even though I feel like we got weirdly kind of put on the other side of it. But that's our version. And just like there's going to be another 3 versions of The Flash with all these various feature films, and there's been, you know, 20 versions of Superman or whatever, you do your version, and that's yours, and nobody can take that away from you. So I'm okay with that. And we did get to do the last set of comics on the Rocketeer with Dave. And that's all there are. And Dave Stevens literally taught me and Danny how to write a comic book script. And I'll tell you something, it was way harder than we ever thought it was going to be. It's an extremely hard format, but he taught us how to do it. So I'm grateful to him for that as well, because we took what we learned from him and were able to write other comics from that.
What do you love most about the Rocketeer from a writing standpoint? What is it in the Rocketeer universe that captures you, that you're there because of this?
Well, I'll say, look, I think there's 3 parts to it that were mine. One is superhero. I would say that's not the inspiration for us. For me. The other is aviation, which really appreciated. You know, Dave and Kaluta were huge aviation fans like you guys. And the third one really, and this is the one for me, was movies of the 1930s. That was the access point. That was the pleasure. That was the passion, was being able to express and participate in our all appreciation for the films we grew up on, watching on television in the middle of the afternoon. And you know, I still look at those films as comfort food. If I'm ever feeling down or something, I'll go back and put in a Bogart movie, a Jimmy Stewart movie, or my favorite Gary Cooper movie. And just seeing it in black and white, it takes me back to the kind of pleasure I derived from it as a kid watching it on TV. And that was my access point, and that's what I love most about working with The Rocketeer. And again, I said to you guys last time, when I've seen the film, and Zone Troopers is similar in this way, I don't know if anybody would ever let us get away with that direct kind of period dialogue again, that we got away with there. And that's kind of unique about it, right? You even mentioned, a couple of lines of dialogue in this conversation. But my access point and sort of the real inspiration and the stuff that's the most fun for me, and I have a strange feeling Paul's going to say the same thing, was the films that we grew up with, those films of the 1930s.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. One of the things I love about the movie is because I grew up reading superhero comics, and I always liked heroes that had human foibles. I love Superman, but I love the Superman stories the most where he was vulnerable somehow, And the idea, one thing that's really works, and it's in Dave's comic, but one thing that I really like about what happens to the character of the Rocketeer of Cliff, the arc of his character, to use the old, familiar term, is that Cliff starts out kind of a brash, selfish guy. He doesn't want to give this thing up. And Peavy's like his Jiminy Cricket, right? Yeah. Peavy keeps saying, Cliff, we got to turn this thing in. It's not right. It's stolen. But Peavy gets dragged into it too until they're over their heads. But Cliff's whole idea is, hey, this thing, I know it's not ours, but we're going to use it to make some money and get ourselves out of hock. And in the course of the story, it's very simple. He has to realize what's the most important thing to him, and that's Jenny. And that's something that, the through line of that character, that's something that I always really liked. It's a very classic through line. And he doesn't start out as, he's got charm, but some of the things he does are not entirely likable at the beginning, his attitude.
Yeah, the arc was very intentional that he starts out selfish and learns to be a hero through helping his friends. And I think I seem to remember that, and we haven't talked about him in this conversation, I probably did in the others, but Bill Deere, the original director, had a lot of influence on the Rocketeer as well. And I remember him saying that to us while we were writing that theme that I just said. As well as I know Bill wrote that line about acting isn't acting, it's acting like you're not acting.
He absolutely did. Line. He absolutely wrote that line. Yeah. That was Bill's. Yeah, and he actually showed up at the 20th anniversary thing too, and he wasn't on the panel or anything, but Paul and I sort of dragged him backstage and had him hang out with everybody because he was a creative influence into the Rocketeer film as well, who got, I have no idea why he was replaced as a director. I don't remember. What I do remember was they were excited about Joe Johnston because of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was a big hit. But I don't remember, Bill having problems with them. But you'd have to ask him because did you ever try to get him for Rocketeer?
I tried reaching out. I never got a response. But Bill, if you're out there listening, please,
we'll do bonus episodes.
We're
happy to do it.
We will.
Because he spent years in development with us on the project, and I remember being up at his house many times, working with him.
I
on the
can
material.
tell you. I mean, Danny, your memory may be different than mine, but there's a couple of things that I remember that came from Bill besides that line, and I remember Bill saying, we were talking about, the big second act action scene, and we always knew we wanted to go to a nightclub in the movie because one of the things that I always love about old movies, especially film noir or whatever it is, a Bogart movie, is when they go to these nightclubs in these 30s and 40s movies because they're always spectacular, right? And I think it was Bill's idea who said, we've got to have a scene where we trap him inside. And he's got to fly around an interior and all the havoc that ensues. And he said, like a fly in a bottle. And that line is actually in the script. Somebody says, we'll trap him like a fly in the bottle. And that's my memory, is that the inspiration for that scene actually came from Bill. Yeah. And
I was giving myself full credit.
well, I remember him saying we
No,
got to...
no, I'm sure. I'm sure he
He
contributed
did.
a lot.
I remember
He
him
did. He
saying we
contributed
got to
a
get
lot.
him trapped inside. And then all the, the various gags and bits with the nets and all the stuff. And as Danny, I know, explained to you, there were a million other bits in there. And I think somebody, because I listened to some of your other podcasts, I think somebody had a question about, it might have been one of you guys, Jim or Hal, asked about, well, whatever happened to the mermaid in Eddie's office,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Well, in the original script, this is one of the things that was cut. That fish tank was supposed to get a bullet in it, and all the water pours out, and she comes flying in a wall of water down the steps, and
Yeah, that was
was
all
all- it was all a
planned.
big
that
stunt.
got cut when they came in and cut the schedule down on Joe. That I remember, and I probably talked about this before. The amount of days shooting in the club, as I recall, they thought he was going over budget, and they said, we're cutting like half the days out of the nightclub. And I remember him being furious, Joe Johnston. And a lot of those bits had to get cut in simplifying that scene. And frankly, I wish they hadn't done that. I really wish that, because that scene in the script, if you ever look at the script, was really one of my favorite action scenes that we've ever written. And it got sort of cut in half.
it's still pretty big, but it was more elaborate.
Remember the palm tree he may turn into a battering
Right.
ram and all that? I mean, there was great stuff.
I was watching All Through the Night the other day, and I was thinking that Gloves Donahue, the Humphrey Bogart character in that, could easily have been Eddie Valentine. And I was just thinking, if you had only had Eddie Valentine's mother there telling you, but anyway, but such was not the case. But it's good on its own. I was just amazed at how much the whole Gloves Donahue gang fighting the Nazis. It was almost parallel of getting out there and doing the right thing, even though he's busy running another operation.
Yeah.
Upside down.
Well, that was always part of the story, that at the end, the gangsters were going to turn on Sinclair, because Eddie hated his guts anyway. And we're going to find an opportunity to turn on Sinclair and join up with the G-Men at the end. I mean, that was always part of the plan, But there were different versions where I think we even might have had an early version where Eddie didn't make it to the end of the movie. I don't remember. We had a bunch of other Eddie scenes that were eventually cut out. And I think Danny talked about how the original inspiration for Eddie actor-wise was someone like Joe Pesci, a firecracker, right? And what we were going for was this contrast of characters, was Eddie as this guy who would come up from the streets, and even though he's wealthy, and even though he's running this huge crime empire, what he would never be able to have is the kind of polish that a guy like Sinclair has. And that, to me, was the abrasion between these two characters. And that got lost somehow. I mean, Sorvino's a great actor, don't get me wrong. But I do think that casting him in that part kind of threw that balance off a bit. And I wish that Eddie had been a more street-type character, because I think the contrast would have been funnier between the two. Eddie, to me, was a Cagney character who was going to explode at any second, And to contrast against the kind of cool, reserved facade that, and the needling facade that Sinclair pushes against him. So that was a little bit of a disappointment in the interpretation. And I'm sure Danny told you told them the story about when we had to go down on the set and mediate that scene, right?
Didn't hear you said that there was some problem with it and who was going to talk about what, but we never got to the who's and the what's.
Well, yeah.
No, it was who's. They got into this whole actor hell about whose scene it was, and we were kind of like, "Hey, you guys are here to." We didn't say this, but to each other, it was, "Well, they're here to serve the story. It's not the story to serve them." And we literally were there all night one night, writing and listening to both of them, and And didn't I tell the story about how Sorvino said if he comes into my office, I'd shoot him? And then we were like, well, if you shoot him, we're in the scene.
No.
It was
That would have been an abrupt
what do you-
ending.
this was our biggest, one of our largest sort of getting in the middle of actor stuff in our careers, where it's like, what planet did we just land on? Because the scene made sense to us, but between those two guys, it felt to us like, who's the power in the scene?
Oh,
and I remember
so that number 3 jerk line when he's throwing the cigar, that's heartfelt.
Oh yeah.
yes, and we were there and we're rewriting the scene and we didn't know what we were doing, because it's like, okay, he says he's not powerful. All right, so we made Sorvino more powerful. What I remember is rewriting a scene, going back to Warner Brothers, because we had to do our show, and then like the next morning getting a call saying, okay, now Dalton doesn't like it.
No, it's true.
Really,
true.
and I'll never forget this, because it was like, this is madness to us, because somehow it got, maybe whatever, they were tired or they were overly emotional. I don't know what was going on, but this kind of stuff happens on film sets, and when I wasn't directing and Paul wasn't, we were just sort of coming in and out, and other people might have more insight into this, but our writer's point of view was, this is nuts. I mean, it's like, it's not about whose scene is it, it's about the story and serving the story to propel it forward. And they got all caught up in which character was more powerful, which to us was madness. I'm telling it, that's what your recollection is, right, Paul?
Yeah, exactly. Well, because in terms of the plot and the forward movement of the situations in the plot, this scene is about Sinclair going into Eddie's office and telling him, you got to find this rocket pack, and if you don't, I'm going to shut you down. And and it's really about, you've got to find the rocket. You're fucking up. He's in there to chastise Eddie, and Eddie says, yeah, I can make a couple of phone calls. And this is pretty much from the original script. He says, yeah, I can make a couple of phone calls myself. And he says, the line, one of my favorite lines in the script, he says, and who are they going to believe? You were the number 3 box office star in America. And he goes out. And the whole idea is that, yes, at that moment, Sinclair has the upper hand. He has to, or the story can't move forward.
Yeah.
He's got Eddie by the nuts in that scene. But Sinclair, and so Tim was actually right from a dramatic standpoint that it needed to be Sinclair's scene. He had to have the last word and walk out with the power in his hand, which is also a trigger for what happens later in the story. Because, 10 minutes later, Eddie's whole club gets shot to shit. So, it's all part of the careful building that we tried to do between those two characters and the tension between them. So being called into the set in the middle of the night to try and fix this thing, we were like, well, we don't even understand what the problem is.
You're
Dramatically,
supposed to be at odds. You don't have to be at odds in real life. This is just...
And dramatically, one of the characters has the upper hand here. You can't both have the upper hand or there's no scene. So... But, Sorvino added some great bits, honestly, that I thought were very funny. Is like another little bit that I really love is when, after they lose the rocket, and when Peavy and Cliff do the jet propelled truck bit, and they get away, and one of his goons is standing there eating a bag of popcorn, and Eddie just reaches over and slaps it out of his hand. That was very 30s, and that was a great bit. That really made me laugh.
Get in the car. That whole Who came up with the "Go Get 'Em, Kid" tagline at the end of Eddie's appearance? Do you know where they came from? Or?
I don't know if that was done on the set or it was probably in the script. I don't remember.
I don't know. It's a little cheesy. I think it worked.
It's perfectly
the way they
cheesy.
did it.
It's perfectly cheesy.
Yeah. No, I don't remember writing that.
They might have just done it on the set.
Yeah, I don't remember writing that. They might have just done that on the set.
Yeah.
But, it's been a long time. So I don't know line by line. I mean, some of the things I remember, and I think another thing that I think Bill contributed this also was the "I like it." I think that's a Bill Deere thing.
That was Bill Deere.
I think that was
Absolutely.
Bill also.
That's a good recall, yeah. That was Bill's bit on the... Because, one thing that we should tell you guys is the first third of the movie, from the opening where Wilmer and his guy are escaping with the rocket back through cliff being shot down over the airfield and the explosion on the field and the rescue of Malcolm, that first section of the movie probably changed the least over all the drafts. And
saving Malcolm is part of the original in the comic.
Those are the two big sequences that are literally from, the opening and the rescue of Malcolm are almost, taken directly from the comic. But that whole first section stayed the same. That had the least changes of anything else from the rest of the script. That first 40 pages, whatever it was. And
did you add anything significant once production started? Were there any rewrites into the? I mean, other than the scene between Eddie and Neville.
Yeah, it was mostly reductive, as it usually is. And once production starts, I don't remember particularly adding anything. Usually, they have to cut something, and you're working your way around that. That's what I recall. I do remember something that's not in the movie, like. Talking about the Bill Deere version, there was a whole sequence, this is part I remember, that was at the nightclub, and the nightclub was like on the Santa Monica Pier or something, and there was like a Nazi submarine. Yeah. And this is the other thing I remember was you go to the nightclub and it says family night. Right. And then it was like, but it was really a gathering of all these mobs, and it was like, we welcome the 5 families, the family from Kansas City, the family from Cleveland, the family, it was like, there were versions of this, because Paul and I, 6 years of development, we did a lot of versions of this movie, especially when we had director changes and stuff. So, but I certainly remember there was a draft fully written with that whole, all the mobsters are gathered at the nightclub, right, which was by the ocean, and there was a Nazi submarine,
and there was a Nazi submarine that was, basically the blimp that was going to take Sinclair and the rocket away. And there was also a version one of the versions that we did with Bill that involved, God, what was that guy's name? Ernst? Remember Ernst, Danny?
that you're bringing it back.
Yeah, Ernst was. You thought he was Sinclair's like valet or assistant or something. And Ernst turns out to be like a Nazi test pilot, and there was some German experimental plane that shows up.
Yeah, like the Wasp that's in the.
Exactly. I think it was inspired by that. And there's a chase between the Rocketeer and that plane, where Ernst is trying to shoot down the Rocketeer, and I don't remember if that led directly to the submarine thing at the end, the U-boat chase, or whether those were two separate versions. But I remember the experimental
we wrote
aircraft.
All of these. Like
these were all written out.
These were all completely scripted. These versions. There was a lot of development on this thing.
You had a mini series here that you could.
Yeah, well, it's part of script development, and I think being at the end of the Rocketeer Minute here, and you got us, it's kind of fun to talk about all the other versions that never happened. It's I think it's appropriate.
Right. I don't know what the licensing would be like, but if you ever came out with a Rocketeer compendium, put me down on the first. I could see having a giant, here's version A and version B of the script. That would be amazing to see.
I think we have some of the earlier versions of the script.
Yeah, we do.
The
one we definitely have, I talked to you about before, is with the ending with all the the air to ground battle. That it wasn't just the Zeppelin; it was all the flyers and all the planes.
The Mojave Desert ending,
and it was all and the gangsters were moving in cars on the ground. That one, that was always my favorite ending. Which probably I don't remember why it was chucked. It could have been taste. It could have been budget. Things like that. But that one. If I was ever going to show anybody what I thought our best written version of the script,
God, what I wouldn't
have
seen that. All those airplanes again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was the other thing that was.
Remember, Dave and Mike were big aviation nuts.
And what was so cool about the movie was that they had all those planes, you know, and they had a big search for a GB replica. It was very, and. I mean, of course, there was some CG in there, but there was a ton of, all the air race stuff, real planes. I mean, that was, you'd never do that for real now. You do it in like Dunkirk. You'd have some, dummy bodies, and the rest of it would be CG, but that was extraordinary to see the detail. And I don't know if Danny talked about at all about, just the visual look and design of the film, but the stuff that Jim Bissell did is extraordinary in recreating. The recreation of that kind of golden, nostalgic California 1930s with a little bit of grit was fantastic.
Well, that's one of the funniest things about it, because when I watch a movie, I'm trying to think of an example. The best one I've got is pretty dated, but I think of something like The Great Waldo Pepper. As an aviation guy in particular, one of my very, very favorite films. But when I watch that now, to me, it's it feels like two levels of a period picture. It's it's set in the 20s, but it's still a very 70s movie. There's still a lot of that sort of pervades it. But I have to say, I'm not just blowing smoke here, but The Rocketeer never once has ever felt like a 90s movie to me. When I watch The Rocketeer, it's just a movie from 1938. It just happens to have better color than most of them. Everything about that rings true start to finish, and I wish I could articulate exactly what it is.
It doesn't throw you out of time. It's like when you're
Right.
watching it's like when you're watching a 70s movie about the 30s and everybody's got shaggy
Yeah,
hair.
exactly.
And you're like,
That's
wait,
the
yeah,
Waldo
yeah.
Pepper kind of thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was very meticulous on all levels. Hair and makeup. It was Marilyn Vance.
the right kind
did
of hats,
wardrobe,
whatever
right?
that-
Marilyn Vance was the wardrobe, yeah.
Yeah.
And just all those things, they were very careful, and I think Bill Campbell told you the story of his audition where he came in with the haircut.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you're right about the hair, because I'll see movies from the 70s or the 60s, like Dr. Zhivago, right? I love David Lean, so does Danny. Everybody in the movie looks great, but Julie Christie's got 60s hair and makeup, and it just throws me right off, It's like, what the hell? Commit.
Oh God, amen to that.
Yeah, or it's like you see, some of these great John Ford movies, these Westerns, and, the females have got, way too much makeup on, and John Wayne looks like a cowboy full of dust, and everybody else looks wrong,
Yeah.
And, but I think the details, they carried him through 100%. There's no anachronistic dialogue. We were really careful with that. Everything.
All the sets, the feel of the diner. You go in the Bulldog Diner and you can picture. You don't have to say, okay, that's a set. It looks like you're really back there.
Well, yeah, but also, they were canny enough to build it so it doesn't look like it was built yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, and the costumes were beautiful.
It was also
great.
It was also an exterior-interior set. It wasn't
Right.
The exterior was just out at Indian Dunes, and the interior was on a stage. They did the whole thing out at Indian Dunes, as I recall, that it was an exterior-interior set, so he could shoot out the door and have, not just a backdrop out there and stage lighting. I believe it was, as I recall, the whole set was out at Indian Dunes. So about what you're saying, I think that the credit goes to Dave Stevens, and Joe Johnston, really, for keeping Dave Stevens involved and appreciating his art and letting him be part of the art department on the movie.
Absolutely.
I think that has something to do with
Absolutely.
it. And the other part has to do with them letting us keep our dialogue and appreciating and letting it be a movie where they talk like a 1930s movie. And I think that that's why it feels like a brightly colored, 1930s movie shot with 1990s cinematography and effects, is that Joe Johnston, and I don't know if he had to fight for it or not because we weren't close enough to it, but having Dave as part of the art department made a humongous difference, and then not having somebody go through the script and rewrite all our dialogue and turn it into contemporary. I'll be shocked if that Rocketeer script has period dialogue. I'll be shocked if it does.
Oh, we can hope.
Well, who knows?
Yeah, you can hope.
Wow.
Who knows?
It's Danny's right in that you can't overstate Dave Stevens' influence on the film. And he was there every minute.
Right.
I mean, it was a labor of love for him. And he felt the pain, he felt the joy, he felt the hard work. And I think ultimately, he was pretty happy with what we ended up with. And I remember one time Danny and I were talking about the movie. And, if you're a screenwriter and you've done this a million times, and if you can look at a film and say, you know what, that's about 70-75% of what we wrote and intended, that's pretty damn good. That's a high percentage, and that's how I look at the movie. There's moments where I go, I wish this scene had been a little more this or a little less that, but that's also kind of ebbed a bit over time, Like there's a lot of things when it was fresher. When I saw the movie in 1992 or 1991, it was different than when I watch it now, because I forget a lot about those things and just enjoy it and for what it is and for what we were able to get in there.
Has forgetting about like the paperwork and the headaches of production made it more enjoyable? I mean, does it make it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Danny said, you would not believe, and I think we saved some of them. Never in my life have I ever had more notes about a script. We were in development, 5 years?
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, the notes were like unending. You thought they'd never, when are we ever going to be done? And so that was tough. And when you look, but I don't think about that now. I just think about how happy I was when they greenlit the movie, and oh my God, we're actually going to make this thing.
I'm actually, honestly, maybe I said this last time, I'm happier about it now than ever, because it now is more appreciated than it ever was. And it's considered, I mean, you guys have that nice thing you say at the beginning of your podcast, The Greatest Adventure. But I think, I really feel like of that era, of the sort of Eisner Katzenberg era at Disney, for live action films, it's one of the most beloved of the era, if not the most beloved. And the fact that they're thinking about making a sequel now, 25 years later, it's a legacy film. And every time I go to, did I tell you this? Every time I go to Disneyland, I wear a Rocketeer t-shirt. And I tell people I'm with, jokingly, it's like, because I love people saying I love that movie, and I can say I wrote it, and then we can have a conversation. I have no shame about that. And I took a bunch of, I was training a bunch of producers from China, game producers, this summer, and we took like 25 of them there. And with a translator, I told the story, and I was wearing one of the newer Rocketeer t-shirts because they made some for the 25th anniversary. And as soon as we got to the first security guard where you bag check at Disneyland, they said, "Oh, I love that movie." And I said, "Oh, I wrote that movie." They said, "Oh my God." And all these Chinese, then the translator's going blah, 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 blah. And they're all breaking up. And I said, "Okay, that's one. Let's see how many we can get throughout the days." I honestly, my kids laugh about it, but I take great pleasure. I always wear a Rocketeer t-shirt when I go to Disneyland because I have so much fun with the recognition that the film now has. And it was a dream of ours for Paul and I, career goal, to have a Disney film because we were big Disney fans. And that is like one that I can check that box and say, we did that. And it's not, one of those other films that may have been a lot more popular, made a lot more money of the era of those live action films. This one has legs and has lived on. And all of that is, I mean, I have the case on my iPhone right now is a Rocketeer case because I got it this summer at Disney World. You can still get them in the place where they print up, they have all these Disney phone cases, and they have a Rocketeer one. And I got one for myself, and I bought one for Paul.
I think Hal is ordering one right
can't
now.
Can't talk, typing.
Well, you know what else is funny is there's a lot. I was on the internet a couple of days ago. I was just looking up, Rocketeer t-shirts because to see there is so much stuff out there that I don't think it's licensed. I don't know, but there's a million really cool t-shirts out there that are not Disney issued, but that are just like fan created logos and pictures and posters. I mean, it's some beautiful stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, I told you guys probably in April, the end of April, there was a gallery showing of tribute art, and you could buy them, and I bought one particular one for both Paul and I that the artist had done it in sort of almost a Rocky and Bullwinkle style of like early 60s, late 50s art style of a Rocketeer poster. And it says it's all part of the show. I mean, so the fact that there's so much legacy around it is awesome. And I may have told you before that when I was working at Imagineering a few years ago on some Star Wars Land stuff and this other project where I was working in the park, and they would always introduce me to everyone. Well, he wrote The Rocketeer. He wrote The Rocketeer. And it it was among the Imagineers. It's a well-known film too. So all of that stuff is incredibly satisfying and a gift to our careers.
Yeah,
I really feel that way.
There are people walking around. We get a lot of people send us their fan art and things like that. We have last week we got somebody has a sleeve of a tattoo on their arm of the Rocketeer, holding his arm out and go get him kid as a logo and stuff.
I had a student in one of my screenwriting classes at USC last semester who showed me a picture of her brother's arm, and he had a flying Rocketeer on his arm. Yeah.
Oh, really?
And so I said, I'll give you some swag. I gave her a signed comic or something to give to her brother, and he was pretty excited. I said, that's nuts. I've never seen a Rocketeer tattoo. That's pretty out there.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
go check our Twitter feed.
Wow.
There's people sending them. I'm sure after this episode we'll have a lot more.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just that people want to be a part of this whole thing, and we have more than one listener out there who build things like helmets and jetpacks and
you
things.
see some of that stuff on Etsy and things like that people have made. I mean, it's
There's a guy building a motorcycle.
Oh,
have you
yeah.
seen that one?
No, I have.
Yeah, there's a Rocketeer motorcycle.
No,
He's
no.
an artist. We met him at a Comic-Con last summer.
He's going to drive it
a
cross
half ago.
country on a tour.
And I've got postcards. He has postcards, 6 different postcards that are hand-drawn art of his motorcycle in different Rocketeer scenes.
Yeah, we have
cool.
there must be, I'm sure he has a website. We'll find a link and send it to you guys.
Okay, we'll put that up on this one.
Yeah, the Facebook group. There's a Rocketeer Facebook group that posts a lot of interesting stuff. I'm sure you guys are well aware of that one.
What's the builders one, Hal? That we received a couple of people through.
Oh,
through their
the
site.
replica prop forum. That's the online forum and things like that. There's
oh, really?
And they have not just props, but they also do a lot of things related.
Well,
to
there was even a guy there who documented his build of the vacuum cleaner. What did we say? We joked that we had an episode of the podcast called the Vacuum Cleaner Minute because we talked about that being a Kenmore Commander with these added fins and a Hoover logo on it and things. And somebody found the original Kenmore vacuum and wanted to recreate that.
And that's right. And he was building a box fort too, if I remember
building
correctly,
the proper
authorized
case
personnel and all that. Yeah.
Else. That was just awesome.
Wow.
Stunning stuff. But yeah, I mean, this you've created, like you said, a legacy that will continue. I mean, everybody that I've ever known that's ever seen this movie will watch it again and recommend it to others. And it's just, I guess it's a little form of immortality that the genius of putting this together is continuing on.
Well, when they had the 20th anniversary screening at the El Capitan Theater here in Hollywood, which is where it premiered, that was the first opportunity that I had to take my kids to see the movie on a big screen because my older daughter was about 2 and my younger daughter hadn't even been born yet. I remember my wife was pregnant when we went to the premiere. And so they, of course, had seen it on television or on video and stuff. But for them to get to see it on the big screen with all the people there and the actors, and we sat right behind Bill Campbell, I mean, they had a great time, and that was really fun for me. And Danny brought his family, and that was really cool. That was a cool night, and a lot of people were there. Joe was there, and Bill Deere was there, and Kevin Smith moderated, and then afterwards they had there's a little museum down the street from the El Capitan, and everybody walked over there, and they had a bunch of displays from the film. And it was just a great night. It was a memorable night, and I was really, really happy to have that kind of second premiere of the movie with friends and family that didn't get to see it the first time around. So that was great. That was a great night.
Well, hopefully there'll be another one at the 30th.
Yeah, or maybe a
See
Blu-ray with some
happens.
extras.
There you
it's
go.
like
Yeah, that would be
It's,
nice, wouldn't it? Or a 4K or something.
I mean,
Maybe a Blu-ray with every episode of the
Maybe-
podcast crammed on it.
yeah.
What the heck?
There you go.
Well, or a better version of Excitement in the Air besides
Oh,
the
yeah.
VHS copies
Jesus.
that everybody seems
Yeah.
to have.
I don't know. That one always puzzled me because you'd think I was really sure for the anniversary one they were gonna or for the Blu-ray, that they'd round a few people up and do some comments, and that was really a missed opportunity, and I don't know why they didn't do it.
Yeah, it's a puzzler, but eventually somebody will realize it at Disney that there's for no other practical matter, but there's money to be made if they actually provided products that people would.
Sure, there is.
They'll come. Yeah.
Maybe with the sequel they'll.
We'll see. Well, yeah. Thank you
guys,
so much. I
really been
appreciate you for going so late with this, and thanks for helping us close out the series.
No, it's been a pleasure, and it was great to have Paul on.
Well, I'm happy that I was able to join you guys for this and throw my dented 2 cents in. But it's also, like I said, this is a really cool document of the movie for me and Danny as well. To listen to other people's stories and to have all this. I think it's a really great thing that you guys did. It's really it's something to add to our collective memory of making the movie, and it's really nice. I'm glad you guys did it.
It's been like a big campfire to sit around and tell stories, and I just can't believe how many people joined us at the campfires.
Yes.
it's been quite a
I mean, Bill was on 10 times or something.
Probably pushing 20 at this point. And seriously.
So hopefully we'll continue to have special episodes on after we finish here, if in case any news comes up, or who knows, maybe there's a TV series in this somewhere.
Exactly.
We'll hopefully bring some back.
Or when Jennifer Connelly comes beating down our door saying, "Please, can you do an episode with me?" And we begrudgingly shrug and say, "Okay, fine."
Hal's dream come true. But we'll see. Wow. But anyway, thank you all for being on the show. For people who would like to continue our conversation, we're always available on social media: Twitter, Rocketeer Minute, Facebook, facebook.com/Rocketeer Minute, the great big website, RocketeerMinute.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes or Google Play, and you can keep up with us all the time. But we will continue closing out. We have an interesting discussion about Industrial Light and Magic tomorrow, so please join us here Tuesday on the Rocketeer Minute. So until next time, over and out.
Go get him, kid.